Research and Development Concordat, and I'm going to be chairing the first session this morning. Firstly, I want to say I'm really delighted by the huge number of people who've registered for today. I think we've got a fantastic programme with a very, very wide range of speakers, and I really hope we're going to have some vibrant discussions around the subject of research culture and practice, which I know is very dear to all our hearts. Now, before I go any further, there are a few housekeeping notices which I hope will ensure that everybody can engage fully in the discussion, and I think that's really important, and that we can all get the maximum out of the day. So firstly, can I ask you to keep your camera and your microphone off while the panel are speaking? And secondly, please use the chat box to post any questions that you'd like to ask, and we will try and make sure that we address all of these during the Q&A session. But if you could put those questions in as we're going along, that will be really helpful because it will enable us to get into the discussion much more quickly when the panel members have finished speaking. Alternatively, in the session, in the discussion, if a question arises in your mind, please just raise your hand and we will do our best to bring you in. We are recording every session, and we will make sure that the recording is available to all our attendees after the forum. And also we are ensuring that your names can be seen by the other attendees in order to encourage networking and post-forum discussions. Now, the programme we've got today was developed jointly by colleagues supporting two of our research concordats, the Researcher Development Concordat and the Research Integrity Concordat. And I think I'm right in saying this is the first time we've brought these two concordats under a single umbrella in discussion. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to those colleagues for all their work that they've done behind the scenes to make today happen. And a particularly big thank you to Dana Gamble, who leads the Secretariat for the Research and Development Concordat, and who really is the person who's done all the hard work behind the scenes. So huge thank you, Dana. I know if we were running this in person, there would be an absolute massive round of applause for you. So do consider you've had a great round of applause from all of us because you've done a fantastic job. Now, our first session this morning is really to set context for today's discussions. We've got a great panel of speakers, and I'm going to ask each of them to talk for about 7 minutes and then open up the thing to questions for the audience. So as I said earlier, if you want to ask a question, please type it in the box so that we can get the discussion going. Now, our 4 speakers are all proactively involved in supporting the development of research culture and practice. We have Daniel Wake, who is a research policy manager at UUK. He chairs the Research Integrity Concordat Signatories Group, and he also co-chairs the ongoing review of the Concordats with Hilary Noon and Shamari Lewis-Wilson from UKRI and Wellcome respectively. And he will include a few words about that in his presentation. We have Bridget Feeney, Assistant Director in the Science, Research and Innovation team at Bayes, who makes a great contribution to the Research and Development Concordat, and I know does many other things. Ben Rayner, Senior Research Manager from the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales, and Charlotte Matheson, Policy and Analysis Officer from the Scottish Funding Council. And both Ben and Charlotte also make a huge contribution to the Research and Development Concordat, and I know do many other things to support research. And very importantly, they're going to give us a perspective from the devolved nations. And I think it's really important when we're thinking about research culture, we think about the UK and we don't think about little blocks of us in isolation, no matter how the politics might feel to all of us sometime. So just by way of introduction, my starting point in discussions on research culture and practice is always that we shouldn't forget the past. Rather, we should celebrate the progress we've made and the successes we've had, and also learn from our various experiences, because I think we'd all agree that some things we've done well and other things haven't turned out quite as we'd hoped, and we can always learn from history. And I say that with some passion, because research culture and practice and the way in which we support our researchers, in the broadest sense of the term, has always been something which has been very, very dear to my heart, right back to the time when I was I suspect, pretty bolshy postdoctoral researcher, and that is a very long time ago. However, and it is a very big however, like the rest of the world, research has changed immeasurably over the past 50 years. And I think we'd all agree that we've got a long way to go to create and sustain an environment that meets the needs and expectations of our various stakeholders and that is deliverable. And I think we should all remember this is not somebody else's problem. This is all our problem. It's a problem that we share, and one I believe that we can best approach by working together and learning from each other. Now, research, of course, is very competitive, we all know that, but good practice really shouldn't be competitive. If we want research to thrive and for the UK to sustain its world-leading position and be a destination of choice for talented researchers, then, in my view, it's essential that we work together to address old and emerging issues, and we evolve and support our research and culture practices. The issues confronting us today are many, from precarity of research careers, inequalities, performance pressures, reports of bullying and harassment and increasing mental health problems, to name just some, together with issues relating to research integrity. All of these have been highlighted in a variety of ways over the last 5 years or so, not least in a report from the Wellcome Trust on research culture, by Dame Ottilie Liza, the current head of UKRI, and by our former Minister for Science, Amanda Soloway, who led the development of the R&D People and Culture Strategy, which was published about 12 months ago and led to a number of strands of work being developed to address the issues and priorities that emerged, which we'll be looking at in different ways. So I think that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over now to Dan Wake for his presentation to get the discussion underway. So Dan, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Julia. I'll attempt to share my slides now. 1 second. Great. Can colleagues see that okay? Excellent. Brilliant. So yes, I'm here today to speak with you in the UK's role as Secretariat to the Concordat to support career development of researchers, otherwise known as the Research Development Concordat, and also the Concordat to support research integrity, otherwise known as the Research Integrity Concordat. Thank you very much again for joining today. It's really great to see you all here. So I'll be speaking about the purpose of these concordats, the background, the development, and ultimately how we can, as a research community, we can use the concordats to drive change and help people to develop a positive research environment. And then with the government's R&D People and Culture strategy in place, we have a really great opportunity to drive this forward. I'll start by talking about the Research Development Concordat. So this concordat is an agreement between employers of researchers and research funders on the expectations for the professional development and employment conditions of researchers in the UK. So organisations sign up to the concordat to show their commitment to achieving its principles. But there are also asked of researchers as well, and it's really important that researchers also identify opportunities to work towards career goals, consider opportunities to develop their own experiences of the wider research system. What I should say as well at the start is that this isn't a Universities UK concordat. While the UK absolutely has responsibilities for supporting its implementation, the concordat is absolutely owned and shared by the research community, as Julia mentioned. And indeed, any organisation with an interest in the career development of researchers may become a signatory of the concordat by the head of the organisation publicly committing to implement the concordat principles. We know from speaking and engaging with universities and other research organisations that people are very passionate and committed in the sector to supporting the UK's researchers. But there's more we can do, more progress can be made. I have a quote here from my fellow speaker, Julia. Research culture can mean a lot of things. It can mean policies, incentives, leadership approaches, behaviours, other factors that shape people's day-to-day working environment. And this quote here is actually included near the front of the Concordat document to iterate that the existence of a Concordat won't change the culture unless we use it. It's not an end in itself. But what it does outline is the belief that if everyone works together to make sure that we effectively implement the Concordat's principles, which I'll come on to, all UK researchers should be working in a much more healthy and supportive research environment very soon. But when did this all come about? Well, it's evolved over time. The original agreement was made back in 1996 between funding bodies and universities, and that aimed to improve the support for contract research staff and now more usually tenure research staff in their career development. And back in 1996, there's much more limited, you might say, career and professional development available to research staff then. But since then, UK researchers' expectations regarding career development and working conditions have grown. The interests and responsibilities of funders and institutions have also changed in response to new employment legislation, amendments to terms and conditions of grants, that kind of thing. And the Roberts report in 2002 included a number of recommendations and in part looked at support available for researchers, including funding. So the 2008 Concordat itself then aimed to provide a single and ambiguous statement of expectations and responsibilities of research funders and institutions with respect to the management of researchers, and was then updated in 2019 following an independent review of the Concordat, and there's a sector consultation on the recommendations of that review. This data has been taken from the Culture, Employment and Development and Academic Research Survey, which is managed and supported by VTI, and also I should say a big thanks to VTI for all the work they've been doing around the Concordat as well in terms of driving that forward. And that includes questions reflecting the principles of the revised Concordat, incorporating the environment, culture, professional development, employment strands, and also thinking about the experiences of managers too. This is just one example of the findings from the survey, and there are other opportunities to engage with the VTI community on these findings. Some findings colleagues might see as really positive, good levels of satisfaction. One thing I think we need to work on now is that you see the stat in the bottom right that 45% of research staff said they haven't heard of the Concordat. So we really need to drive up those numbers in the community, promote the principles, engage the principles that are being applied, and days like today are one example of promoting that. So how can the Concordat support the careers of researchers, and what are the responsibilities of different stakeholder groups? Well, I guess the Concordat has three core principles. So the first is environment and culture, the idea that excellent research requires a supportive and inclusive research culture. The second is employment, so researchers are recruited, employed, managed under conditions that recognise their value and importance. And the third is professional and career development. Those are really vital to enabling researchers to develop their full potential. And these principles should be implemented by four stakeholder groups, so they're researchers, managers of researchers, institutions and funders. And the Concordat clearly outlines as well, or hopefully where these stakeholders are responsible for the different principles. In terms of what's needed for success, well, the first is that we all recognise our own collective responsibility and accountability. We also want institutions to make sure they're effectively implementing that at all levels, raise awareness, gather feedback, report on progress. We also want funders to support this as well through selection processes and reporting, promoting and supporting good employment practices. We need managers as well to have the skills and time to support researchers in the broadest sense, and also make sure that researchers are aware and proactive and engaged and making their voices heard. So just to end on the research development Concordat side of things, we have a strategy group which is responsible for promoting the implementation of that. So the group is tasked to oversee, monitor, support the implementation of its principles, make sure it's developed and implemented by and for the research community, advise on any policy and practice that promotes the principles, monitor whether the Concordat's actually having a sufficient impact upon policy and practice, and think about how we might adapt it accordingly, encourage the recognition nationally and internationally of the UK's leading position in the development and training of researchers, and just making sure we continue to monitor the research and innovation landscape and thinking about the wider strategy and policies such as the R&D, people and culture strategy. Earlier this year, the group developed a standalone website as well and published an annual report highlighting progress and plans to take things forward. But it's really important that we engage with you now in the wider research community on these activities. So do get in touch if you'd like to support this group's work. Great, so I'll say a few words as well about the Concordat to support research integrity. As well, I'll provide a bit of an overview and I'll say a bit about recent activities as well the group has undertaken and future plans as well. So this Concordat provides the principles and commitments to make sure that research produced by or in collaboration with UK universities, research institutes, others undertaking research is underpinned by the highest standards of rigour and integrity. The original Concordat was published back in 2012 and was designed and co-developed by EUK and funding councils, basically to provide a national framework for good research conduct and its governance. So the idea was that although universities and research funders have kind of long worked together to support and promote research integrity, a Concordat provided a kind of more effective mechanism to sort of collaborate, demonstrate the high quality of research produced in the UK and the integrity of our researchers. The latest version was published in October 2019, in part following findings from the Science and Technology Committee, but clearly a lot has happened since then. But as an overview, the commitments basically call on universities, research institutes and individual researchers to ensure their work is underpinned by rigorous high standards. And this issue of research integrity must be continually revisited as well, just to make sure its principles are understood, accepted, and that the obligations and commitments are met. In terms of the signatories group that supports the Concordat, has a number of different objectives. We've been having a discussion about this as a group quite recently, actually, and set a number of objectives going forward. But we see it being responsible for a few things. So again, like the Research Development Concordat Strategy Group, we see this group as being responsible for promoting and monitoring implementation, working with other organisations to improve policies and practices for research integrity in the UK. And I've also included the group members here. So membership of this group is based on the ability of the organisation to reach a relevant community and help develop the key outputs. But it works collectively to do a few things. So first is periodically review and update the Concordat, at least every 5 years what's appropriate, last updated in 2019, as I mentioned. It's also there to monitor and encourage engagement with the Concordat, share good practice, convene discussions with the research community, coordinate responses to government calls for evidence where relevant to research integrity, and then also work with other organisations, including the new UK Committee on Research Integrity and the Reproducibility Network as well, to ensure a consistent approach to research integrity and address key issues. And of course, we want to work with other Concordats as well, and I'll come on to the Concordats and Agreements review shortly. So in terms of how we want to do some of this, we've kind of split this into three key outcomes. So one is producing an annual narrative report on signatories' activities. We produced one earlier in March this year. We can send a link perhaps afterwards if you haven't seen that. Second is to do an annual sector level analysis of annual narrative statements. And the third is hosting a forum, which we're doing today on progress and implementation of the Concordat and discussing some of the key issues. So hopefully moving forward, we continue to want to work with a new UK CORI, identify share good practice, support implementation of the people and culture strategy, which Richard will come on to, identifying lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. We think that's important as well. Developing further guidance to support signatories. We want to do an analysis of annual narrative statements as well to identify good practice, and then support the next steps of the Concordats and Agreements review. So I'll just end by discussing some of the work that we're commissioning to look at the Concordats and Agreements collectively in terms of how they support the research culture and environment. So commissioned by EUK, UKRI and Wellcome, we gather some insights on various Concordats and Agreements currently in place across the research landscape. So phase one, which has now been published, has looked at kind of insights on the effect of these initiatives and how they interact. This report's only a snapshot of the research landscape in summer 2021, doesn't draw any conclusions or recommendations, but phase two, which is due to commence shortly, will be informed by the work and will look at future orientated alignment for increased influence, capacity and efficiency in research cultures and environments. So that's it from me. We see Concordats very much as aspirational, flexible, living documents. It's really important that we reflect changes in the research system and understand good practice. So we'll want to make sure, we're periodically revisiting the Concordats to make sure they remain fit for purpose. That's everything from me. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Julia.
Thank you very much indeed, Dan. That was a great start to setting the discussion. Now I'm going to hand swiftly on to Bridget, who's going to be talking to us, as Dan said, about the people and culture strategy. So Bridget, over to you.
Hello, thanks very much. I'm going to just put my slides up now, and then if somebody can just give me a thumbs up that you can see them. So this has gone into PowerPoint Live, which is not what it did last time, but let's see anyway.
Yeah.
So you've got that. That's lovely. Okay, so that was a slightly worrying moment for me. And I apologise, for my laptop only has the camera right below the screen, so I sort of look like I'm looking down on people, which is not what I'm meaning to do at all. So I can only sort of, looking at myself on the screen, feel a little bit self-conscious about that. But anyway, to say hello, my name is Bridget Feeney. I work in BEIS in the Science, Research and Innovation Directorate. It's a policy directorate that works most closely with UKRI. And we do work in terms of corporate sponsorship of UKRI, and also develop policy around science, research and innovation, and think about the system in the round. And the job I'm in looks at the research system and thinks about it as a kind of as a system. So I suppose I'm repeating myself in terms of using the word system too often. But anyway, what I want to talk today to you about was a little bit about the people and culture strategy, and I was reflecting on the programme today, which is a great programme with lots of good speakers and lots of really interesting sessions, and a lot of it really resonates with the people and culture strategy, and as is already pointed out, do the Concordats, which we're really kind of doing that deep dive into today. So in terms of kind of going through my slides, I'll move on to the next one. So there's a little bit of a background on the R&D People and Culture Strategy. As Julia said, it was published last July, so we're coming up to the first anniversary. I led the team that was doing the work to support Amanda Soloway in developing this, and I think it's fair to say that her personal interest in people and culture issues was really pivotal to being able to develop this strategy, despite the fact that there's kind of massive appetite and interest within the research sector as an issue. I think having that ministerial lead was really important for us to be able to kind of gather that together and create a strategy. And it really came out of some work that we've been doing in 2020, which was about the R&D system in the round. So there was a kind of publication called the R&D Roadmap, which was trying to kind of understand the issues facing the system and think about where we needed to make progress. And there are a number of different government strategies came out of that. We talk about the roadmap less, but the people and culture strategy and the innovation strategy were both kind of came from the R&D roadmap. And in terms of the people and culture strategy, I think first is we got a great deal of sector engagement, which would not have been possible to work on without. So we had a lot of people who gave us feedback, who engaged with it, and we created 3 broad strands based on the vision that you can kind of see in the second bullet point, and the key 3 strands were around people, which is looking at the workforce and thinking about how we have the people working in R&D which support the government's vision for R&D at the centre of economic growth and social benefit. On culture, we talked a lot about co-creation and about this being a shared endeavour and creating that vision of the culture which really supports the sector and makes it a great place to work. And then on talents, we were thinking a lot about how the UK can attract and retain the talent that it needs in order to kind of strengthen and kind of move the system forward. In terms of progress, we had a series of short-term actions, and we can see really quite good progress across the piece. So there's a lot of things that we committed to which have been moved forward, and I think a lot of that has been taken forward through cross-sectoral action and engagement by lots of different people in it. So you'll see sessions today which are around the resume for research and innovation. A lot of the progress there has really come out of lots of different funders and UK and other bodies engaging with it and thinking about how they can take that forward. So we've got good indications of progress. UKRI have worked to pull together a kind of people and culture programme across their strategy, which I think is quite a powerful way of making sure that they have good coordination for the work that they're doing. And there is a ministerial coordination group which is chaired by George Freeman, So having had Amanda Solo as a champion, George Freeman has very much committed to taking that forward and supporting implementation. And that group is in its early stages, but brings together lots of people from across the sector and is looking at some particular themes around career paths and around diversity. So we're seeing that the strategy is moving forwards, which is really good. In terms of the types of outcomes, again, in the strategy, this is really like it's quite high level. Obviously, across the sector, you probably have lots of outcomes that you might want to see. So this is kind of I think some of these we tried to distill some of the key things that were really came out as important issues from talking to people. And in terms of the issue, and in terms of the things that I draw your attention to, there are things to do with incentives in the system, which people talk a lot about. So incentives at a personal level might be around the way that we've sort of thought about the narrative CV. But if you look at the work on the Future Research Assessment Programme, we've come through REF 2021, but on the Future Research Assessment Programme, the need to look at healthy research culture is embedded in that. And that's quite an important measure, I think, which will have a long-term impact. So there's incentives. There's work around behaviours and thinking about how we can create a positive and respectful culture, and that very much kind of echoes some of the things that so Jeremy Farrar, for example, has kind of talked about a kind research culture, so that idea of kind of what it is like to work in research, and there are things about the values that underpin the people's experience of the culture, and research integrity and the Concordat really, for me, kind of, you know, bridge across all of those three kind of incentives, behaviours and values kind of way of thinking about things. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my key takeaways from working on the people and culture strategy, which I think kind of very much linked to the event today, and a couple of them have been said already. One of them is that there's a massive appetite in the sector. It's really clear to us doing this work that there were lots of institutions that cut across, that are funders, or like UUK or the Russell Group, that were talking about research culture and wanting to see action. We're also seeing lots of individual institutions and lots of individuals thinking about what they could do and the case for trying to improve the culture of research. So there's a lot of work already, and there's a lot of appetite for sure. In terms of this thing around kind of the strategy we described as a call to action, and that was deliberately because it's about collective action and everybody having a role to play. And I wouldn't underestimate, I think it's really important that as individuals we think about the culture that we want to work in and how we can contribute to that. And that's a really important point for me, that an institution can have the best ever policies, but if people don't read them and use them in their day-to-day practice, then it kind of falls a bit flat. So there's something about collectively we make a difference. There's a third thing about recognising that it is complex and there's a lot of interrelatedness between the issues, but actually entering into this work at some point and doing things that we can do straightforwardly is still powerful and important. So I think despite the fact that it's complex and interrelated, one of the things the strategy tried to do was just to nail some actions that could be taken forward, because that gives us progress. And then I think the fourth thing for me, I was hoping to get 3 things, but I ended up with 4, so that was very disciplined of me. But the fourth thing was around inclusiveness. And I think that inclusive vision of culture is really important, which is about across the UK, across academia and industry, all the roles that contribute to research being a successful endeavour, all the diversity in terms of people and ideas, and around the kind of that notion of team science, team research as being kind of really important. So there's quite an inclusive vision that really underpins all of this. So I hope the rest of the day gives you lots to think about. Certainly it has big resonances with the work we've done, and I'm going to stop there because I know time is tight.
Well, thank you very much, Bridget, and it's great to hear that there's so much progress being made on the implementation of the people and culture strategy, because, as you said, we can all have policies on the shelf, but unless we actually act on them, they're all a bit meaningless. So that's really great to hear. I'm going to hand on swiftly to Charlotte, as you said, time is tight, so over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks very much, and I'll just share my screen if someone can let me know whether you're able to see that okay. That's brilliant. So thanks everyone. It's my pleasure to talk with you today. And my name's Charlotte Matheson. I'm a Policy Analysis Officer at the Scottish Funding Council, working in the Research and Innovation Directorate. And I'm going to give you just a really brief canter through a few things today. So I'll be looking, first of all, apologies. First of all, just giving a really brief background to the Scottish Funding Council and the Concordats, then talking you through really briefly, the Scottish Funding Council undertook a review of tertiary education and research, so talking you through some of the recommendations that came from that and some of the actions that we'll be taking as a result of that. And then I wanted to highlight just a couple of examples of really good practice relating to the Concordats in Scotland. So I will crack on and start with, so Scottish Funding Council is a signatory to the Research and Development Concordat and also to the Research Integrity Concordat, and we are interested and involved in the work of both of those. We've got representatives on both the signatory and strategy groups for both Concordats and involved in some of various task and finish groups and so on. Scottish higher education institutions are expected to adhere to the principles of both Concordats, and the way that they do this is via the individual outcome agreements that are agreed yearly with the Scottish Funding Council. So I want to move on now and talk very briefly about a recent review. So the Scottish Funding Council back in June 2021 published a review that had been sort of several years in the making that really looked at absolutely everything that takes place across the Scottish Funding Council. There are a number of recommendations that came out of this review specifically relating to research. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's important to highlight the fact that these recommendations took all sorts of different things into consideration, but concordats were really key in terms of forming some of these recommendations relating to research and research culture. And the concordats will also be key in terms of the way in which these recommendations are implemented as well. So there are things, for instance, one of the recommendations is to work with the sector to develop a blueprint for establishing a positive research culture in Scotland. There are recommendations around supporting research collaboration and better supporting the postgraduate research experience through changes to our research postgraduate grant and also opportunities for national graduate schools. So I'll just talk you through a few of the pieces of work that are happening in terms of their implementation that are either happening now or about to happen soon. So first of all, we had a review, a consultation around our Research Excellence Grant and our Research Postgraduate Grant that took place between November last year and January this year. Now that's led to some updates to the Research Excellence Grant funding formula, which is our big unhypothecated research grant. But the outcomes from this review, we found some really rich and useful data, which is going to feed into our future research culture work and underpin a lot of the policy development that takes place. We've also, at the moment, are in the middle of stage 1 of our SFC Alliances for Research Challenges. So the expressions of interest stage recently closed on this, and the idea behind this will be developing challenge areas that will be focal points for SFC supported cross-sector collaboration across Scottish universities. One piece of work that I'm really excited about at the moment is around supporting Scotland's postgraduate researchers. So we're in the middle of setting up an advisory group where we're looking to get representation right across the sector from a range of different career levels, people from different parts of Scotland, academic staff, postgraduate researchers, professional services staff and others to really come together and consider a national response to UK developments in the postgraduate research landscape. So applications for membership for that have just closed. We've been really impressed with both the number and the quality of applications we've got. So we think this is a really exciting future space, and the advisory group will be looking to start work in the next academic year, so probably starting around August of this year. And then finally, we had a recommendation around research culture, and this will become an increasing focus for us in academic year 2022-23. So that's a little bit about what we're doing at SFC. I just wanted to really briefly highlight some good practice that's happening in Scotland around the concordats. So one of the key things I think is really important is around the ability to knowledge share. And we have some higher education practitioner groups that are focused on both research integrity and researcher development, which are providing spaces for knowledge distribution, discussion of policy and sharing of good practice. So these include the Scottish Research Integrity Network, ScotHERD, which is the Scottish Higher Education Researcher Developers Network, and then University Scotland's Researcher Development and Training Committee. And finally, I want to very briefly again just highlight another example of good practice, and this is being undertaken at the University of Glasgow, where they have a lab for academic culture. This brings together the discussion of culture and environment in research, but also in teaching, so it aims to bridge the gap between these two areas. And they're working on projects to improve academic culture within their own organisation, but also to work with others to drive improvements across the sector. So one way in which they've done this is they supported early career researchers to write a narrative CV, which was then reviewed by a mock panel as a way of understanding how well this works, where there might be difficulties and so on. They created a report on their findings. They held a sector-wide event and created resources for anyone who was writing a CV. So this seems like a really forward and proactive way in which research culture is being kind of actively supported within Scotland. So I realise that's been a really brief canter, but please do feel free to get in contact if you do have any questions. My contact details are there. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Charlotte, and really impressive to hear about all the work that's going on in Scotland, and I'm sure people will want to hear more about it in due course. So finally, let's hand over to Ben and have a perspective from Wales. So Ben, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you very much, and many thanks to colleagues at UK for putting this together. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Ben Rayner, Senior Research Manager at the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales. I will rocket through this as quickly as I can, as I'm conscious of time. Can everybody see those slides? Brilliant. Right, so very briefly who we are. We are the National Funder and Regulator for Higher Education in Wales. We are sponsored by the Welsh Government and are an arm's length body governed by our own council. And we are responsible for regulating and funding higher education institutions in Wales. I'll rocket through the background particularly quickly. We do this by providing core unhypothecated funding for research and innovation to higher education institutions, and we engage with partners in Wales, across the UK and globally to try and make and influence research and innovation policies and to promote positive behaviours and performance. And a very key part of that is working with the sector and signatories through the Concordat. HEFCW is a signatory of both the Research Integrity and Research Development Concordat and sits on the governance bodies for both Concordats. Our research and innovation policy and funding is driven by our vision for research and innovation in Wales. This is our strategy document we published in 2019. Obviously, the world has changed quite a lot since 2019, so we refreshed it in 2022 with more of a focus on recovery and research and innovation, rebuilding Welsh economy and society as we seek to emerge positively from the COVID pandemic and its effects. The vision as a whole is governed by 4 interconnected pillars: excellence, place, innovation and collaboration. I won't go into too much detail on those, but in terms of how research culture and practice fit into this picture for us. When putting together the vision, we considered how best to express our ambitions, our hopes and goals around research culture and practice in Welsh higher education. And it struck us that given that excellent research and the researchers that produce it lie at the heart of research and innovation in Wales and indeed across the UK, that the best way to express those ambitions were by embedding goals and aspirations linked to research culture and practice across the pillars of HEFCW's vision. I've given a breakdown there of some of the ways in which we try to do that, but it's rather artificial, but I think it shows that promoting positive research cultures and positive practices are central to all of our strategy and the policies and funding streams that derive from it. In terms of what this means in practice for HEFCW, as a national funder, we don't employ researchers or offer grant funding directly to research projects. So we have to support initiatives strategically and work with our partners in Wales and across the UK to try and drive change and promote best practice. So similarly to Scotland and the SFC's outcome agreements, our terms and conditions of funding expect our funded institutions to be signatories to both the Research Integrity Concordat and the Research Development Concordat. We monitor that compliance through annual assurance returns and regular discussions with our institutions. We are in the unique, we're in the privileged position rather of being able to speak directly with our institutions on a regular basis, given the size of our sector. We have very good relationships with those responsible for implementing the Concordat principles in universities that we fund, which means we can all work together closely. We help fund a number of training and career development programmes for researchers in Wales, including Welsh Crucible. This is an award-winning programme for early career researchers. Sair Cymru, a wide-ranging programme of academic recruitment and retention in Wales. And we sponsor Advance HE to deliver leadership workshops. There are other initiatives as well, which we've not had the space to put on here. But I wanted to highlight that from last year, we've been partnered with the Learned Society of Wales, who are developing, with HEFCW funding, a Pan-Wales programme of research development of support. This is the first of its kind in Wales and is bringing together researchers at all career stages and staff supporting them in a Pan-Wales network that has really exciting potential. And finally, our work with partners across the UK is crucial. I want to highlight the importance of the Concordats to us in enabling that. As a relatively small regulator and funder, working with partners in who are also signatories to the Concordats can ensure that we are putting our best foot forward for Wales and that our policies and funding are reflecting best practice. Looking to the future, what are we planning to do here? Well, it won't have escaped anyone's notice that there have been very significant developments in the last few years at a UK-wide level that will influence research culture and practice. Some examples there. So our Research Wales Committee met last October. This is the committee that advises our Council on Research and Innovation Matters to discuss these and other issues. A report was published from that workshop in February 2022. It's up on our website if anyone is interested in reading it. And I just wanted to indicate that it highlighted a number of research culture and practice related points that we are working with our council, our institutions and partners across the UK in trying to find ways forward on. These will be familiar, I think, to a lot of people who work in this area: how to balance focus on retention versus recruitment, how to support staff at more precarious points of their career, what the role of bureaucracy should be, and finding that balance between encouraging and promoting good practice culture and principles without erecting new barriers to that happening, or indeed new barriers to people entering the system or thriving within it. And also the need for more data, basically, so we can monitor how we are progressing, where we are and where we want to go. So that's a very whistle-stop tour from me. Very happy to answer any questions now or in the future on Wales' ambitions in this area. But I just wanted to highlight again points that other speakers have already made about the importance of the Concordats as sector-owned living documents that can help us all work together and pull in the same direction across the UK on these very important areas. Please do get in touch with any further questions about Wales' work here.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, again, and another great presentation. So a big thank you from me to all four of our presenters, who I thought gave really great talks, and I think really demonstrated what a huge appetite there is for a step change in our research culture. And I think it's something that we all want, but it's really great to feel that this drive is happening. We did start a little bit late because of the team site was playing up a little bit. So we're going to let this session run on for another 3 or 4 minutes or so. So it's time for questions, and I can't see any questions in the box, but Dana is going to coordinate questions for us. So Dana, I'm in your hands.
I think I'm taking this one on, Julia, because Dana's sorting out the next session. Yeah, I think we've got one question in the chat actually asking us what we envisaged as a new barrier to progress. So we may want to pick up that question.
Right. OK. Well, thank you. It actually impinges on a question I was going to ask you, which relates to bureaucracy, because while we've heard a lot about the things which are going on and are very positive at the moment, I think one of the things we're all concerned about is what seems to be growing bureaucracy in higher education. And of course, we know there is work going on to reduce bureaucracy, with the review being led by Adam Tickell. And I just wondered if perhaps you might like to comment, Dan, on how the work looking across all the 13 concordats and agreements that we've got across the sector is related to the bureaucracy review, and to what extent you see bureaucracy as a barrier.
Absolutely. I mean, and ultimately, we, you know, at the end of the day, we want universities, other research organisations to be able to get on doing good, excellent research without having to put up with unnecessary bureaucracy and red tape, I guess. In terms of how the concordats and agreements review fits into some of that, I mean, the work we did for phase 1 of that review very much showed that there are absolutely net positive benefits of these concordats and play an important role in research culture and environment. I think what it perhaps did recognise is that there's maybe a little bit more that we can do to think about how they can work together a little bit more effectively, whether it's streamlining processes, just thinking about how collectively they operate. So we're hoping that phase 2, which is just about to kick off, I think next week, we've appointed an organisation called Exentia to undertake that work. They'll be able to drive some of that forward and have conversations with the community, with the initiative owners, to have conversations about how we can sort of identify actions just to make sure that we have a more coordinated approach to everything. So that fingers crossed that will be the outcomes of that next phase.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan. Now there's one question here which is directed at Ben, but actually I think we could also broaden it out, because I think it's a big issue about how we get researchers themselves to be more engaged in the Concordat. And it's really quite worrying when you think about the data that Dan showed, that 45% of researchers have never heard of the Concordat. I mean, that really is a very worrying statistic. So I'm going to, as a last question, I'm going to ask each of our 4 speakers in turn to comment on how they think we can communicate better with researchers and get them proactively involved in, after all, is something that we're working to support them on. So Ben, I'll start with you.
Yes, thank you. And to respond to David directly in the Welsh context, my advice would be to first get in touch with the research and innovation services in your institution. If you're aligned with an institution, they could direct you to the officers responsible for the concordats in your institution, and to look at the Learned Society of Wales website as well, where all the details of their Pan Wales network are there. In terms of wider engagement and promoting the Concordat, I think building upon the work that has been done recently, particularly by Dana at UUK, in developing a dedicated website for the Research Development Concordat, and also the work that the UK Office of Research Integrity does regularly on promoting the Research Integrity Concordat. Building on that work in the future will be important, and continuing to promote it. But I think there's I think there's an onus placed upon us, funders and owners of the Concordat, to make more of an effort to reach out directly to researchers through institutions, but also through sessions like this in the future, to try and spread those messages.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben. Charlotte.
I would echo a lot of what Ben has just said there, around the onus being on us to make sure that it's highlighted. And I think that sometimes it can be easy to assume that people are aware of the Concordat and assume that if they've heard of it, that they actually understand what it is. And I think that one key thing that we can do, obviously, with things like the website, that's fantastic, but also, for instance, as a funder who's a signatory, making sure that when we're having these conversations that relate to it, that we bring it back to the Concordat and make people aware of how this links in with their own experiences as a researcher.
Fantastic, thank you, Charlotte. Bridget.
I mean, I agree with everything that Ben and Charlotte have said in terms of kind of the ways in which we can reach out. I think the other point, of course, is that it's as important for, well, probably more important for researchers to experience the impact of the Concordat as to be aware of it. So, you know, what we want is we want them to, is ideally, you know, it will make a difference to their experience of their support for their careers would be the outcome we want to get to, and that's kind of as more important in some ways than whether or not they know there's a Concordat there in the first place. So I think just balancing it kind of against like where do we want to get to. So I think for me it's the outcome's really important here.
Yeah, thank you. Very good point, Bridget. And lastly, Dan, I'm going to give you the last word.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I'd agree with that. I think there's probably more we can do to help inspire researchers a little bit more. So actually sharing examples of what works well. We have kind of a host of annual kind of statements that research organisations submit, for example, to the Concordat. Let's take a look at those, see what organisations are up to. Let's pick out some of that good practice. Rachel in the chat also mentioned that a research development Concordat platform of practice for sharing examples as well. That's another way we can get some of this information. So I think there's more we can do to provide examples of what the sector is already doing to sort of spread the word and encourage others to do the same.
Great, thank you, Dan. And it's keeping up the momentum, isn't it? Because it's awful easy to leave a conference like this full of good intentions and then your inbox fills up and other things get in the way. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we really are keeping the momentum up and we keep that message going out. Now, very sadly, I think we really do have to bring this session to a close. We've got more questions in the chat, and if my colleagues want to tap in some answers, do please feel free to do so, because I think that would be really helpful to everybody. So I just want to say a big thank you again to all 4 speakers for really great presentations. I think it's an excellent start to what I think is a wonderful programme, and I hope that all our delegates have a good day and have some real take-home messages and actions at the end of the day. So thank you all very much, and I'm going to hand on to the next session, and Dan, you will understand the mechanics of it, but I'm afraid I don't.
Yes, so it's just thank you, Julia. It's just to leave this session and join the next Teams meeting now. So hopefully, yeah, so we'll see you all there.
We all need to leave this site, move on to the next meeting. Yeah, okay.
Great.
Mass exit then. So thank you all very much. See you again in a minute, I hope.
Thanks.